As soon as we finished last week,
Harold Mitgang.
I hear Fagel. Yes, that's the Harold Mitgang Zichrono Livracha that we all know and fondly remember.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So after last week's class, Rhoda Waxman, I don't know if she's here today, sent me an email and said, quoted Harold, Hashem. Did he talk like that, Fagel? Hashem as opposed to God? Okay.
Well, we won't go there.
Okay. Gave us one tongue and two ears for a reason. We are meant to use these parts proportionately. Very, very wise. And I think that it sums up Chafetz Chaim's perspective on speech. Now, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin will offer us today a psychological, a philosophical perspective on when and how to talk about and to someone. Now, who is Rav Telushkin? If we look at text number 2, anybody familiar with this nursery rhyme? I do not love thee, Dr. Fell. The reason why I cannot tell. But this I know and know full well. I do not love thee, Dr. Fell. Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as a little child, Joseph Telushkin's mother would read him this nursery rhyme. His father once overheard her reading it, and he said, "That's not right." He said, "It's unfair to Dr. Fell." Why do you think he said that? Anybody? What's unfair about it? And I believe that from early childhood, and he says it himself, that this and what his father said had such an impact on him that that's why he devotes so much of his thought and writing to words. Anything you can come up with that's unfair about that?
If you disapprove of someone, they have a right to know why.
Exactly, Linda. His father tells him, you were not specific. You don't just say in general, and we all know that to be true. If somebody's going to criticize, you want to hear what it is specifically, or you should be specific in giving it. So that's the beginning of Rabbi Telushkin. He's written hundreds of books that I'm sure some of them you're familiar with. Considered one of 50 most prominent speakers in the United States, not just of Jews. He's a good friend of Dennis Prager, and they've written together. And he is responsible for the following. In 1995, because of conversations that he had with, you remember Senator Lieberman of Connecticut? Mack and Lieberman proposed this resolution. And I want you to keep in mind what we're about to read as I then go back to this past Monday. As a matter of fact, I'm going to switch what I'm going to say. We'll read this resolution in a few minutes. On Monday, the 12th of Cheshvan, was the 26th anniversary of Yitzhak Rabin, Zichrono Livracha's murder. It is a day that should reflect the acknowledgement that unlawful violence is never acceptable. It is a day that should highlight the danger of inciting toward irresponsible reactions. But accompanying the meaningful words about Rosh Mמשלה and General Rabin's contributions to our people were too many ugly moments in the parliament and elsewhere in which individuals of differing ideologies express themselves profanely. Now, this pathetic scenario, friends, is not limited to here. And now let's look at this resolution in the United States. And I repeat that they were inspired by conversations with Rav Tolushkin. They're hoping that May 14th, 97 and May 14th of 98 would be National Speak No Evil Day. Whereas words used unfairly, whether expressed through excessive anger, unfair criticism, public and private humiliation, bigoted comments, cruel jokes, or rumors, and malicious gossip, traumatize and destroy many lives, whereas an unwillingness or inability of many parents to control what the parents say when angry causes the infliction of often irrevocably damaging verbal abuse on the children, whereas bigoted words are often used to dehumanize entire religious, racial, and ethnic groups and inflame hostility in a manner that may lead to physical attacks. Now, I have to tell you the honest truth. That's a weird expression. I don't believe, because I could not find that this was passed. I'd like to know, but I do not believe that this one day was passed. Now, if that's not close enough, let's go to 2014 in Canada. Now, Erwin Kotler had proposed this, and it was not passed in 2012, and he tried again. Again, I do not think it was passed. Erwin Kotler's proposal for a National Speak No Evil Day, here is the text of the motion that Kotler would put to the House for unanimous consent, because that's the only way something like this gets passed. And he says in the resolution that in the opinion of the House, the government should designate December 10th each year as National Speak No Evil Day, when parliamentarians and citizens are called upon to partake in a day for the promotion of mutual respect and public civility, deploring A, the increasing incidence and intensity of assault, of abusive speech in parliamentary discourse and debate, and B, the decline in civility and the corruption of public discourse. He chose December 10th because that is International Human Rights Day. Now, the writer of this, Aaron Weary from McLean, says, it's not, Kotler explained to me, that MPs wouldn't be able to say anything negative that day. What we don't want, ad hominem, attacks, he says. In other words, you can take tough-minded stands on the issues. You can be seriously argumentative on the issues. You can be partisan on the issues. But what we don't want is impugning people's integrity, that kind of thing. So certainly our speech is very much a contemporary ill universally. But we never give up. We never give up. President Herzog, speaking on Mount Herzl, said we will never give up on finding a way to disagree ethically. So I'd like to look at Rav Telushkin and let him suggest why we do the gossiping that Chafetz Chaim outlawed. And he offers 4 reasons. Anybody here want to suggest reasons for gossiping? He lists 4. Anybody?
Envy,
Ida, again?
envy,
Envy. Okay. Anything else?
Attention seeking.
Okay, Michael?
To raise ourselves, make us feel better, superior.
Okay, you're on the right
Insecurity.
track. Sorry?
Insecurity.
Insecurity. Yeah. Anybody else? You're touching on what he has said. We're still missing Gloria.
Revenge on getting even with somebody who's done something to you.
Yafet. That's the 4th one. I think you've covered it pretty much except for 1. Anybody else? Okay, so in his words, raise our status through lowering the status of others. And that could do, I think maybe Rhoda said insecurity. Now notice he points out, who do we usually gossip about? We usually gossip about people who are our social equals or superiors. Secondly, we enjoy, he says, the come down of someone who summons us to a morally upright life. In other words, what does he mean? That people love it when a rabbi or a priest is found guilty of something, because it then gives us a sense there's not so much pressure on us to be moral. Third, he says sometimes when we share inside information about important people, we're hoping people will see us as being as important as those important people. And lastly, as Gloria said, revenge. Revenge. Now, speaking of revenge, Telushkin encourages controlling rage and anger, and he gleans this from our Tanakh. So let's see. In Shmuel Samuel 1. Now Michal, daughter of Saul, had fallen in love with David. Now, he points out Michal is the only woman in the Tanakh whose love for a man is recorded. Usually, what is it? Isaac loves Rivka. Jacob loves Rachel. Samson loves Delilah. But here, Michal loves David. Now, we're going to see the significance of that in a few moments. Then, as we go on, and Saul said, "Say this to David, the king desires no other bride price than the foreskins of 100 Philistines as vengeance on the king's enemies. Saul intended to bring about David's death at the hands of the Philistines, but he's trying to persuade David that if you do this, you'll get my daughter. When his courtiers told this to David, David was pleased with the idea of becoming the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David went out with his men and killed 200 Philistines, Plishtim. David brought their foreskins, and they were counted out for the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Shaul then gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that Michal, daughter of Saul, loved him, Saul grew still more afraid of David, and Saul was David's enemy ever after. Now, why bring this text? Because even though it doesn't specifically say, as it did, Michal loved David, you realize that if somebody is prepared to put his life at risk, then that means there is indeed an intense love between Michal and David. Now, we will see that Michal, to just bring the point home, Michal is totally devoted to him, because what happens? Saul wants to find David because, remember, he really still intends on having him killed. Saul sent messengers to David's home to keep watch on him and to kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, told him, David, unless you run for your life tonight, you will be killed tomorrow. So she sends him away. And what does she do? Michal let David down from the window, and he escaped and fled. Michal then took the household idol, laid it on the bed, and covered it with a cloth, and at its head she put a net of goat's hair. Saul sent messengers to seize David, but she said he is sick. Now, she's being very bold. Shaul, however, sent back the messengers to see David for themselves.
Oh, boy.
Bring him up to me in the bed, he ordered, that he may be put to death. When the messengers came, they found the household idol in the bed with the net of goat's hair at its head. Shaul said to Michal, why did you play that trick on me and let my enemy get away safely? Because, Michal answered Saul, he said to me, help me get away or I'll kill you. Now, she was trying to defend herself. She was scared of what her father would do. Now, what happens now? These texts so far are meant to tell us how deeply devoted they were to each other. What happens in text number 7? David has been supervising now the return of the ark to Jerusalem, and that's a major feat. The enemy had removed it. And apparently he celebrates, and in Michal's eyes, overzealously. David went home to greet his household, and Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, didn't the king of Israel do himself honor today, exposing himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects, as one of the riffraff might expose himself? So she's very upset with him, and rather than appreciate how happy he was, she really lives into him. Now, David answers Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his family and appointed me ruler over the Lord's people, Israel. I will dance before the Lord and dishonor myself even more and be low in my own esteem. But among the slave girls that you speak of, I will be honored. Now, what has gone on here? She is angry and she expresses it. What does David do in his answer to Michal? It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his family. What is he doing there that's going to mess up things for this couple that was so in love? And Telushkin is warning couples about this, and all people who have relationships.
He's
Read it
putting
to
her
yourselves again.
down. He's putting her and her whole family down. In other words, he's
Increasing the
raising
lie.
himself above them.
Yes. I think somebody else wanted to say something also.
No, I said who he spiel. It's the same word in the Hebrew.
Yes.
What he claims
Okay.
was done to him, he does to them. Same
Okay.
thing.
Now, beyond what both of you, Marlene and Nechama, have said, which is very true, what he's doing is he's not just answering. He's not answering her complaint at all.
No.
He doesn't try to apologize. He doesn't even try to excuse it, really, but he escalates and brings in an issue that has nothing to do with this. So he's saying something out of anger, as many people will do. You start off an argument on a minor issue, and then the closer you are, sometimes the worse it gets, because you have all this inside information that you know how to push somebody's buttons. And the whole sequence of the psukim here is that you go from a couple that is so devoted, each of them willing to risk their lives, and then because of this argument, how they fall. And how does it end? Look at the last line here. So to her dying day, Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children. What is the significance of that last verse?
Didn't sleep with her anymore.
Exactly. That's how alienated they became. They didn't work it out. They just escalated their anger. And if you read more of the psukim in the chapters, you will see that. And that's how it ended up. Now, each of them was known to have a sharp tongue. They needed to listen to Harold Mitgang, who lived much before them. Okay, now, on the other hand, you do have to express your feelings. All of us need to. But it has to be done in a certain way. So we know that in Vayikra, this line, do not hate your brother in your heart. Meaning you might talk to somebody, but if deep down in your heart, you have these deep feelings of anger or hate, it's gonna come out somehow. And better in a conversation that might be extremely difficult, but it's gotta come out, and to the right person. To the right person. So he looks at another incident. Telushkin, I'm sorry, Abe, Rav Telushkin, from Samuel. Now, Avshalom and Amnon were brothers. King David was their father, but they had different mothers. So Amnon had raped Tamar. And of course, Avshalom was furious. And notice what it says. And Avshalom spoke unto Amnon neither good nor bad. For Avshalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. Now, what the pasuk, the pasuk itself, the Tanakh is making this comment. He didn't talk good or bad. It would have been better to express it, if he could calmly, than not say it at all, because sure enough, what happens 2 years later? Anybody? Take a wild guess.
He kills him.
Yes, Avshalom kills Amnon. So certainly it would have been better. Now, who knows what would have happened? And how can we really know for sure whether somebody can talk civilly to somebody who has harmed in that way a sister? You know, you have cases here where they'll say that a family, a mother, do you remember Waxman,
That's right.
Esther Waxman, whose son was kidnapped and murdered? She went around speaking and encouraging and even met with the family of the terrorists. I don't know. Anyway, so his next point is going to be, and please, if anybody, of course, as usual, wants to ask, question, make a comment, feel free to unmute yourselves. Telushkin then goes on to say that fighting can happen. Just as Cutler said, but make sure, you have to make sure that you're doing this ethically. A couple of the people that talked at the ceremony that the Knesset had with each of the parties speaking, they commented and said, everybody is watching this on TV, and young people, and we have to be models for them. Sometimes that's easily said, but it has to be. It has to be. Anyway, so Telushkin goes on in his wonderful book to say we have to fight ethically and we have to criticize ethically. And again, don't let a quarrel over something minor escalate. Now,
That's not mine.
we know that criticism is always meant to be constructive. And he wants us to beware how important it is to criticize constructively. Parents have to understand that their job out of love is to give constructive criticism. And that's how anybody who gives constructive criticism, whether it's a teacher, a principal, an employer, anywhere, you have a right, as long as it's constructive and you're doing it for the right reasons. So one more time, Telushkin brings in a text from the book of Melachim, Kings. So, now Adoniyahu, the son of Chagit, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared him chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. He is already planning a takeover after his father, King David, dies. Imagine somebody doing that. And the Torah, the Tanakh, explains why he felt comfortable doing that. It puts the blame on his father. And his father had not grieved him all his life in saying, "Why hast thou done so?" In easier English, that the king, as a father, had never told his son, "Hey, you haven't done this correctly." Or asked him, "Why have you done this?" Now note, the Tanakh is sticking to what Telushkin's father said. You've got to be specific. You ask, "Why have you done this?" You know, criticism isn't an evil thing. And many today look upon it as try to stay away from it. No. And I say that humbly and with the support of Rav Telushkin and the Tanakh. Now, another point that he makes is very interesting. How you criticize. You cannot humiliate while criticizing. The person won't hear you, whether it's in public or whether it's in private. You certainly don't in public, but even in private. And he points out, be aware that even the most self-assured person can be devastated. And I just want to read to you a section that he writes about Isaac Asimov. Everybody familiar with this writer?
No.
Did he write 2 books? Did he write 5 books? He wrote 470 books. He was a premier intellect.
No printing press.
Isaac Asimov.
Isaac Asimov. So please listen. As a 15-year-old high school student, Asimov had enrolled in a writing class taught by a man named Max N.
Huh.
He's not saying the last name. The teacher's first assignment was to have the students write an essay. When he asked for volunteers, Asimov raised his hand. And Asimov says, he wrote this in his memoirs shortly before he died, "I had read only about a quarter of it when N stopped me and used a barnyard term to describe my writing. I had never heard a teacher use a dirty word. I was shocked. The class wasn't, however. They laughed at me. Although hurt and humiliated, Asimov conceded then, and in his memoirs, that N's negative assessment of his writing was correct. He admitted it wasn't the best. He had attempted an affected literary style. What emerged was rotten, Asimov himself says. So he took the teacher's negative reaction to heart, and a few months later, he wrote a light-hearted piece that N printed in the school's literary journal. It was the first significant piece of work by Asimov that was ever published. But when he thanked N for running the piece, N said, I just needed an easy piece.
Oh, please.
You needed what?
An easy piece.
It's a fill-in, a filler.
Yeah. 70, when Asimov wrote his memoirs, remember he was 15 when this incident happened. At 70, Asimov knew
Listening to Bracha Feder.
Asimov knew he was terminally ill and died 2 years later. Yet anyone who reads this account realizes how fresh his pain was even after 55 years. I hate very few people, Asimov writes of Max N., but I hate him. I hate him. And he says, if you had treated me right, I could have recorded you as my discoverer instead of branding you a rotten louse.
Wow.
So we have to keep in mind how, not just what we say and how we say it. Now, Telushkin suggests that before offering criticism, you ask yourself 3 questions. How do I feel about offering this criticism? Meaning, does it give me pleasure or pain? And then you'll understand what your real motive is. 2, does my criticism offer specific ways to change? And 3, are my words non-threatening and reassuring? So before we say something, do actually, as mentioning Rhoda again, she told me on her fridge, she had for her children, and maybe for herself and Clifford as well, ensure your brain is in gear before opening mouth.
Right. Put brain in here before opening mouth.
That's a good one.
Okay?
Mhm.
Now, criticize, but do not humiliate. Let's look at a scenario from the Talmud, Masechet Sanhedrin. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, a great, was sitting and teaching, and he smelled the odor of garlic. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was very sensitive and could not tolerate this odor. He said, whoever ate garlic should leave. Rabbi Chia stood up and left. Out of respect for Rabbi Chia, all of those in attendance stood up and left. The next day in the morning, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, found Rabbi Chia and he said to him, are you the one who disturbed my father by coming to the lecture with the foul smell of garlic? Rabbi Chia said to him, there should not be such behavior among the Jewish people. I would not do such a thing, but I assumed the blame and left so that the one who did so would not be embarrassed. Now, 2 things about this. I love the scenarios that give us images that are far from perfect of our rabbis. That says so much, just as we see in the Tanakh, that none of our ancestors were perfect. Everyone is human. Secondly, commentators say about this Rabbi Chia that he had in mind not just nobody should be humiliated, but better he, because everybody already knew him and he was well respected. And he'd be secure. But the younger rabbi who had eaten that garlic didn't yet have a reputation, so he certainly would have felt devastated. Okay. Now, people, we don't just strive to not humiliate and not make someone feel badly because of our words. or lack of words. But we should also strive, Telushkin suggests, to regularly implement hakarat hatov, acknowledging when somebody has done something good or is a good person, not just at a special moment, but regularly, and make others feel better when they need it. Again in the Talmud, walking in the marketplace, Rabbi Baroka asked Eliyahu, the two of them were known to walk. This actually takes place in a marketplace in Persia. And Rabbi Baroka asked Eliyahu Hanavi whether anyone who was in the market at that time was Ben Olam Haba, someone who was assured a place in the world to come. Eliyahu replied, no. In the meantime, two men walked by, and Eliyahu remarked, actually, these two are assured a share in Olam Haba. Rabbi Baroka approached them and asked what their profession was. They told him that they were professional jesters who entertained people who appeared to be sad or depressed, or who worked to make peace between people who had been angry at one another. We so desperately need these gestures in whatever form they will take. You know, in saying that we're talking about speech, one could say, how much can you talk about it? But it is one of the biggest ills of our time, and so rampant and so frequent on a daily basis. Now, the second part of Telushkin's book is "And Words That Heal." So I want to ask you, he lists 4 healing words, actually some phrases, 2 statements and 2 questions. But I'd like to hear from you. What do you consider healing words?
Love you.
I love you. Okay, that's one of them.
How can I help you?
In other words, he says it, what do you need? Yes? 2 more.
I understand.
Very good. Anybody else? The simplest, thank you. And connected, how are you? And he says that actually took this from a list by a Rabbi Jack Reamer that some of you might be familiar with, and he claims that he left off one other, and perhaps the 2 hardest words people find to say. What are they?
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Now, he spends time, Telushkin, in saying how very important vis-a-vis communication and relationship building it is to really be interested in knowing what the other person needs. And yes, not make the most of your tongue, but your ears. And he points to the following. And I'm reading again, just briefly. Those who visit mourners during the week following a death are instructed to remain silent until the mourner speaks. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of that.
No.
Sometimes we feel we have to immediately say something, anything. No. the visitor has no way of knowing what the mourner most needs at that moment. Thus, the visitor might feel that he must speak about the deceased, but the mourner might feel too emotionally overwrought to do so. Alternatively, the visitor might try to lighten the atmosphere by speaking of a movie or some other irrelevancy, just when the mourner's most pressing need is, yes, to speak of the deceased. And of course, the mourner might just wish to sit quietly and say nothing. What matters is the mourner's needs. Ascertaining when someone needs allows us to give him or her what is most meaningful, whether a mourner or in another situation, is thus perhaps the highest expression of love. I want to end with something very touching that I saw just a few hours ago on TV.
Oh,
The power of one word can make a world of difference. 2 years ago, a fellow in his 20s was riding on his cornconet. It's like a scooter. Ro'i Avraham. And not wearing a helmet, he was killed.
Mm.
And his mother has been on a campaign pushing for helmets. 2 years ago, Michael Chorin received Ro'i's heart. Over these last 2 years, Michael has become a part of Ro'i's family. They have celebrated Chagim together, Shabbatot together, establishing quite a relationship.
Oh my goodness.
And the family is very appreciative. So what has happened this week? What's the one word I'm talking about? Michael showed us his Teudat Zehut, his identity card, which is new, because he officially added to his name Ro'i's family name,
Oh, wow.
Avraham.
Wow.
And that has, I don't want to say made the family happy, but
No,
it's a way of saying that something good, unfortunately, fortunately, came of such a tragedy. And with that word, you saw Ro'i's mother on the TV saying how much it does mean to them. And just an aside, they have seen, and more has to be looked into, but that he really feels that in part he is Ro'i. Some of his qualities have taken on the form of Ro'i's. But that's all to
could
come
be
and say
psychological too,
that when
if they tell him what he's like.
I watched that, it was hard for me not to think, because I would be seeing you in a few hours. I thought of the power of one word. So, on that note, I was so happy that Rhoda mentioned Harold and that you could be here, Fagel, so that we could mention somebody who hasn't been around for a long time, because that's just proof. You say something, and how many years after did Rhoda remember that? How many years, Fagel?
31.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Now,
And he
Rhoda,
loved
I have a
Rhoda.
question. Do you remember what you ate yesterday?
Can't remember what I ate yesterday.
Yeah.
But he also, let me say, he loved Rhoda, and he loved when she walked in the door to keep him company. So we don't forget that either.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let us all be inspired by that, and watch our words and never stop speaking, but ethically. Okay. Be well
Good
and have
class.
a great week.
Bracha, I picked a
Thank
good
you.
one to join you with.
Thank you, Bracha.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bracha.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yes.
Thank you. It was
My
beautiful.
pleasure.
Yep, it was great. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So thoughtful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you heard that that's a word you're supposed to say. How about I love you?
I love you.
Yes,
You're
Nicole.
No, I love you guys. Okay.
Happy
Bye,
birthday.
Bracha.
Steve.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay
Take care of
healthy and
yourself.
safe.
Thank you.